I learned the hard way that in my marriage and then in the courtroom that replaced it, my restraint was never read as discipline, only as confession. The first person who taught me that was my husband, and the second was the bailiff who looked over my shoulder in Department 47 and said, "Ma'am, petitioner's table is full. You can take the chair behind counsel." It was my custody hearing, my name on the docket, my daughter's life measured in boxed findings and check marks, and I was being seated one chair back as if access to my own case required permission. My name is Lauren Lewis, and that was the morning Derek Hall stood under fluorescent light and polished brass and called me unfit in a room that pretended not to reward theatre. Even now, when I think of that hour, I do not remember his face first. I remember surfaces. Waxed wood benches reflecting white light. Stainless door hardware dulled by disinfectant. The county seal mounted behind the bench like a commandment engraved in metal. Family court has a scent of paper dust, stale coffee and hand sanitizer, a sterile fog that implies order while people quietly bleed reputation onto the record. I sat with my palms flat against a legal pad because if I folded my arms I would look defensive, and if I touched my throat I would look fragile. Presentation had already become evidence. Derek knew that room better than I did, not because he had lived there, but because he understood audience physics. He arrived in a charcoal suit that fit too well to be incidental, with a navy tie that read, "Trustworthy from 40 feet away," and cufflinks his attorney had likely advised against, but he wore anyway. His file tabs were color-coded for visibility, not use. He stacked his exhibit so that the top page faced the gallery at an angle, accidental enough to deny, deliberate enough to signal preparedness. When he greeted his counsel, he did it loudly, with clean diction and measured concern. "Good morning, Karen. I appreciate you fitting me in before Chambers." He wanted everyone behind him to hear civility first. When my attorney, Melissa Tran, leaned toward me, she kept her voice low and precise. "No reactions. Let him overstate. We need him comfortable." Her legal pad already held 3 columns in block letters. Claim, foundation, contradiction. I nodded once. The movement felt mechanical, as if someone else had borrowed my neck. The clerk called our case. Hall versus Lewis. Matter on temporary and permanent custody allocation. Allegations of parental unfitness and instability. The phrasing landed like a clerical weather report. No tremor, no judgment, just rain where a roof should have been. Derek stood first because, of course, he did. He rested 2 fingers on counsel table, looked at the judge, then let his gaze sweep briefly toward the gallery before returning to the bench. "Your Honor, Lauren Lewis is emotionally unstable, professionally absent, and unfit to parent." He did not rush the sentence. He placed each adjective with the care of a man selecting cutlery at a formal dinner. Unstable, absent, unfit. 3 words built to survive quotation. I heard a pen stop moving somewhere in the second row. I heard someone exhale through their nose, the faint courtroom version of agreement. I heard the old crack inside me, not theatrical, not dramatic, just familiar, the internal seam that had formed years earlier when he first discovered that if he named me before I could name myself, most people would accept the first version offered. I kept my eyes on my legal pad and wrote exactly what he said, not because I needed a transcript, but because writing turned impact into data. Data can be argued. Data can be. Pain in family court is often treated as strategy. The judge, Honourable Miriam Kessler, watched him over reading glasses that turned her expression opaque. "Mr. Hall, you will confine yourself to admissible facts and sworn declarations." "Yes, Your Honour, the facts will show repeated emotional dysregulation, prolonged absences due to elective overwork, and inability to provide consistent nurturance." He said, "Nurturance like it belonged in a policy memo." He passed up an affidavit packet with yellow flags already protruding. "We have witness statements from neighbours, school contacts, and family acquaintances." Melissa rose with the controlled economy of someone who had done this too many times to waste motion. "Objection to characterization and to unsworn hearsay if counsel intends to argue neighbour impressions as behavioural diagnosis." "Noted," Judge Kessler said. "I will assign weight accordingly." "Continue, Mr. Hall." "Weight accordingly." Family court's polite phrase for "we heard it anyway." By the 3rd week after filing, I had learned that every institution has its own dialect of erasure. In emergency medicine, silence means triage. In court, silence can be translated as concession. Derek had learned to weaponize that translation long before we separated. At school registration, he joked with office staff that I was our household compliance officer because I brought immunization records, allergy plans, and emergency contacts in labeled sleeves. At pediatric follow-ups, he would smile at the resident and say, "Lauren means well, but she can be intense," whenever I asked whether dosage instructions could be printed to avoid contradictions between pharmacy labels. At dinner parties, he would lift his glass and tell stories about my hero complex during trauma rotations, recasting overnight shifts and missed holidays as vanity projects instead of labour that paid our mortgage and kept health coverage uninterrupted when his consulting contracts thinned. The most efficient lie is not the one invented from nothing. It is the one stitched from true fragments and framed before anyone asked who benefited. I worked long hours. True. I documented schedules and symptoms. True, I expected follow-through on medication timing, speech therapy homework, and bedtime consistency. True. He translated each truth into distance, rigidity, and emotional coldness, then repeated the translation until even neutral listeners began to use his vocabulary. I was no longer organized. I was controlling. I was no longer exhausted. I was detached. I was no longer disciplined. I was brittle. His genius, if I can call it that, was making degradation sound like concern. The judge turned toward my table. "Ms. Lewis, do you wish to respond at this stage?" Every eye in that room moved to me in one synchronized pivot. The attorney waiting for an outburst, the gallery waiting for tears, Derek waiting for confirmation that he had mapped my nervous system correctly. My heartbeat climbed, then steadied. I stood. "Yes, Your Honor," briefly. My voice came out lower than I felt. "I deny the allegations. I request that argument proceed in evidentiary sequence and that all claims be tied to authenticated records rather than characterization." Derek's mouth shifted, not quite a smile, more like an annotation in the margin of his confidence. Judge Kessler nodded. "That is how this court proceeds, Ms. Lewis. You'll have your opportunity." I sat down. Melissa didn't look at me right away. She marked something in the contradiction column and whispered, "Good. Keep that tone." Derek resumed, now with exhibits. He referenced selected text messages from weeks when I had been on pediatric trauma nights, highlighting timestamps at 2:14 a.m., 3:02 a.m., 4:40 a.m. "She did not come home," he said, omitting that my shift ended at dawn and that I often showered at the hospital before driving straight to school drop-off. He cited a message where I wrote, "Please make sure she gets 5 milliliters at 7 p.m. exactly. If fever persists, call me," as evidence of directive hostility. He offered a photo of a color-coded binder and called it obsessive control documentation, as if planning for a child with asthma and food sensitivities were pathology. He invoked my residency years, though we were discussing present custody, because chronology is pliable when emotion is your evidence and the room is tired. At one point he said, "She prioritizes protocols over people," and someone behind him made a sympathetic sound. That small sound cut deeper than the formal accusations, because it proved the mechanism was still working. He didn't need the court to believe every claim. He needed ambient doubt. Doubt reshapes outcomes long before findings are entered. Judge Kessler asked for foundation on 2 attachments. Derek's attorney answered smoothly. Melissa objected where she had to and conserved where she needed leverage later. I remained still, a posture that took effort I did not have. My left thumb pressed into the edge of the legal pad until the cardboard bent. I could feel heat rising at my collarbone, the body's old argument that danger must be met with volume. I let the heat pass. Reaction was the trap. He had called me volatile in writing. He wanted me volatile on camera. When we broke for a 10-minute recess, the hallway outside Department 47 filled with litigants holding folders like life preservers. A vending machine hummed beside a bulletin board listing mediation resources and parenting classes in 2 languages. Derek stood near the water fountain with his attorney and spoke at conversational volume designed for collateral listeners. "She's performing calm now," he said. "It's what she does in public." He did not look at me. He didn't have to. He had spent years proving he could injure without direct contact. Melissa handed me a paper cup of water. "Do not engage him," she said. "I won't." You're doing exactly what we discussed. I took one sip. The water tasted faintly metallic, as if it had been waiting in old pipes for this specific morning. Through the narrow window in the courtroom door, I could see the bench still empty, the county seal fixed above it, patient as weather. I had once believed that if I stayed measured, truth would automatically align with me. That belief was naive. Truth in these rooms requires scaffolding, authentication, sequence, foundation, persistence. Emotion alone rarely survives cross-examination. Performance often does. The bailiff called us back in. Chairs scraped, files reopened. Judge Kessler returned and adjusted the microphone stem by half an inch, a tiny act of control in a day built from contested narratives. Derek rose again, confidence intact, and requested to move directly into broader fitness allegations. Melissa stood before he finished the sentence. Your Honour, before additional character claims, respondent requests confirmation of pending evidentiary motions previously filed and served, including subpoena compliance status. Judge Kessler looked down at the docket, then to the clerk. I have that noted for later this morning. Later this morning. 2 ordinary words, but they landed in me like a held breath finally finding structure. I did not smile. I did not turn toward Derek. I wrote the words at the top of a fresh page and underlined them once. Silence wasn't peace. It was discipline, and I was going to need all of it. Judge Kessler kept one hand on the docket and said, We will address pending motions in sequence. Petitioner may proceed with live testimony on current allegations. Then I will take up subpoena compliance. The order sounded neutral, but Derek heard permission. He rose with a practiced slowness and adjusted his jacket as if he were stepping to a lectern instead of advancing a petition to reduce my time with my child. Thank you, Your Honour, he said, then turned just enough for the gallery to take in his profile. This concerns immediate emotional safety. He used that phrase the way consultants use market risk, broad enough to alarm, vague enough to avoid precision. Karen Halbrook called his first witness, a neighbour from our old block named Marlene Pritchard, and Marlene walked to the stand with the uneasy posture of someone who wanted to appear reluctant and important at the same time. She was sworn. She folded her hands. Karen began with soft prompts about community barbecues and school pickups, then tightened the line. Based on your observations, did Ms. Lewis appear warm and emotionally available to the child? Marlene glanced toward Derek before answering. She appeared efficient, she said, not affectionate. A quiet murmur moved through the back row like paper sliding across a desk. Karen's follow-up was sharper. Did you ever hear the child express fear about transitions to her mother's home? Melissa objected. Foundation, hearsay within hearsay, but the judge allowed limited testimony for what the witness claimed to have observed. Marlene nodded, eager now. I heard Ellie say she wanted to stay where it was calmer. She took a breath, then delivered the sentence Karen had engineered for impact. A little girl needs a mother, not a shift supervisor. The room registered it instantly. One stifled laugh, 2 heads turning, a bailiff's brief glance toward the gallery. Derek lowered his eyes in a performance of discomfort, so polished it looked rehearsed in mirrors. I felt heat move up my sternum in a hard vertical line. My jaw wanted to answer for me. Melissa touched my legal pad once with her pen, a prearranged signal that meant hold. I wrote the quote word for word instead, pressing so hard the next page took the imprint. If I reacted to Marlene, Derek would say the witness had struck a nerve because she was accurate. If I stayed still, I could force the statement back into the only territory that mattered: admissibility, credibility, motive. Karen moved to the projector and displayed enlarged text messages on the courtroom screen, each cropped to preserve accusation and remove context. The blue bubbles were mine, clipped to single lines. Dose at 1900. Confirm inhaler in backpack. Please stick to bedtime plan. On the screen, they looked like commands from a compliance manual. Off the screen, they were the language of pediatric routines, asthma management, school mornings, and a child who slept better when the adults acted like adults. Karen paced before the monitor and asked Marlene whether those messages reflected maternal warmth. Marlene said, "No, they read like instructions to staff." Derek's attorney did not smile, but she let the sentence hang. Then she asked to publish a printed calendar marked with my night shifts in red. For visual clarity, she said. In red ink, every overnight rotation became an absence without purpose. Every double shift became abandonment. Derek spoke from counsel table without waiting to be prompted. Your Honour, this is what I have lived with. Schedules, directives, no tenderness. My daughter has been managed, not mothered. He turned and looked at me directly for the first time that morning. Lauren, you can run a trauma bay, but you cannot run a child. The bailiff said, Sir, direct your comments to the bench. Yet the sentence had already landed where he wanted it, not just on record, but in the social bloodstream of the room. By 11:20, even the fluorescent lights seemed louder, flattening faces and sharpening edges on every file folder stacked between us. Karen requested permission to play a voicemail I had left during a night shift when Ellie's fever had spiked and Derek had sent a photo without a thermometer reading. The audio carried ambulance noise under my voice, clipped and urgent. Please give 5 milliliters now, then text me her temp in 30 minutes. Karen paused it mid-sentence and asked, would you characterize that tone as nurturing? Melissa objected to argumentative framing. Sustained. Karen rephrased. How did that tone strike you, Miss Pritchard? Marlene said, cold, like orders. I could feel my pulse in my fingertips. I remembered that night in full. Isolation gown at my wrists, pager vibrating, 2 residents waiting on my signature, my daughter in another house with a fever and a father who preferred commentary to data. The memory did not make me cry. It made me precise. Still, precision is easy to misread when an audience has been primed to equate softness with virtue and procedure with indifference. Derek requested a brief recess to compose himself. He dabbed at his eyes with a folded handkerchief, no tears visible, and the gallery offered him the reverent silence usually reserved for grief. In the corridor outside Department 47, he stood near the case schedule posted on the wall and spoke just loudly enough for strangers to become witnesses. I never wanted this, he said to no one in particular. I begged her to slow down for our daughter. A woman waiting for her own hearing put a hand over her chest and gave him a sympathetic nod. That single gesture almost split my composure open. Melissa stepped between us, not confrontational, simply present, then handed me a clean sheet and said, document each quote, each foundation defect. Your anger is valid. It is not useful in his format. I nodded because speech required too much force. The vending machine compressor kicked on with a metallic rattle. Somewhere down the hall, a clerk called another case name, and a child's drawing taped to the mediation office door fluttered when someone passed. Family court is filled with language about best interests, but its daily mechanics often reward the parent who can weaponize narrative faster. Derek understood tempo. I understood records. For years, tempo had beaten records in rooms like this. When we returned, Judge Kessler denied Derek's request for immediate interim modification, but allowed him to continue on credibility issues. Karen called him to the stand. Sworn, seated, hand on the rail, he became calmer, almost paternal in cadence. He spoke about bedtime resistance, about emotional aftershocks, about my inability to attune. Then he introduced the line he had been building toward all morning. Your Honour, Ms. Lewis presents very well in professional environments. That has fooled people before. At home she is erratic. He paused. Frankly, I worry what happens when no one is watching. The accusation was strategically indirect, suggestive rather than specific, crafted to produce alarm without inviting immediate impeachment. Melissa objected to speculation. Overruled as to his stated concern, subject to wait. Derek lowered his voice further. My daughter has asked me more than once if Mommy is mad at her for being a burden. He didn't look at me while he said it. He looked at the judge, then briefly at the gallery, then down at his own hands as if ashamed to speak. It was clinical theatre, and it was working on everyone who wanted a simple villain. Melissa cross-examined with narrow questions and no dramatics. Mr. Hall, did Ms. Lewis request temperature logs during illness episodes? Yes. Did she provide written medication schedules from treating physicians? Yes. Did you ever tell her she was dramatic for asking for dosage confirmation? I don't recall. Did you produce all in-home recording devices in discovery? Karen objected, outside scope. Melissa answered, credibility and completeness, Your Honour. Judge Kessler said, I will permit one question on production status. Derek shifted in the witness chair. There were no relevant recordings. He said it cleanly, eyes steady, with the confidence of someone who believed a denied fact ceased to exist. Melissa sat without comment. I kept my face neutral and watched the court reporter's fingers strike that sentence into permanence. Then Karen did what she had threatened in settlement conferences and avoided in pleadings. She asked that I be called out of order for limited questioning on current emotional stability in courtroom conditions. The request was absurd and predictable. The judge allowed 10 minutes constrained. I stood, took the oath, and sat with my back straight against wood, polished by decades of anxious litigants. Karen began with my schedule, then my certifications, then the number of nights I had spent at the hospital over the prior quarter. Each answer I gave was factual and brief. She leaned in. Miss Lewis, would you agree that your communication style can be severe? I would agree that my communication style is direct when child health is involved. Would you agree your daughter sometimes cries before transitions? Children cry at transitions in many homes. Would you agree you are emotionally intense? The question was bait disguised as assessment. I let one breath pass before answering. I would agree this is a high-conflict proceeding and I am focused on accuracy. Karen glanced at the bench, dissatisfied. You seem very composed today. Is that rehearsed? I heard a few chairs shift behind me, people preparing for a crack they expected to witness. I pictured Ellie's lunchbox lined up beside her water bottle on my kitchen counter, the way she insisted the zipper face left, the way routine gave her a sense of order when adults failed. I kept my hands open on the rail so the court could see they were steady. Composure is not rehearsal, I said. It is discipline. Karen tried once more. Did you or did you not prioritize career advancement over maternal presence? Melissa objected, compound and argumentative. Sustained. Karen rephrased with irritation she could not entirely hide. Do you deny that your professional ambition reduced your availability as a parent? This was the moment Derek had been waiting for, the pivot where any defensiveness would be relabeled instability and any grief would be called manipulation. I chose the narrow door instead of the dramatic one. I deny that responsible employment and structured caregiving are evidence of unfitness, I said. I also request through counsel that the court now hear pending subpoena compliance and evidentiary authentication as calendared. Judge Kessler looked at me for a long second, then at the docket. Request noted. I stepped down, returned to my chair behind counsel and wrote one line across the top of my page in block letters. Stay in sequence. Derek did not turn toward me. He did not need to. He believed the morning belonged to him. I believed in records that did not blink. I believed in records that did not blink. And for the next several minutes I had to believe in something else too, that a room could still be turned by fact even after half a day of narrative corrosion. Judge Kessler looked from her notes to counsel and said, I will take 15 focused minutes on pending compliance issues before lunch. Ms. Tran. Melissa stood, one hand on the table, and asked for enforcement of prior subpoenas, production logs, and a forensic foundation hearing on items withheld in discovery. Karen Halbrook was already on her feet by the second sentence. Your Honour, this is tactical delay. We are in a fitness hearing, not digital litigation. Melissa did not raise her voice. Respectfully, we are in a credibility hearing now because petitioner testified under oath that no relevant in-home recordings existed. Derek's expression did not move, but he shifted his pen so it lay parallel to the table edge, exact and controlled, the way he used to line up silverware before dinner when guests were coming. That small movement pulled a memory straight through me with surgical clarity. 5 years earlier, in our old dining room under pendant lights he had chosen for modern warmth, he had stood at the head of the table while his parents and 2 colleagues watched him carve roast chicken in precise slices. I had come in late from a double shift, still carrying the antiseptic scent of the hospital in my hair, and I apologised for missing the first course. Derek smiled at his mother and said, Lauren saves children for a living, so ordinary clocks don't apply. Everyone laughed softly, approving his wit, and I took my seat beside an untouched place card that read, Dr. Lewis in his neat hand. During dessert, his father asked whether I planned to reduce nights now that Ellie was in preschool. I answered that we needed the income stability and that my rotation would ease after credentialing. Derek lifted his glass and said, Translation. She trusts protocols more than people. The men at the table smiled with the relief of a joke that carried no cost for them. I remember looking at the polished fork in my hand and thinking how efficiently a life could be reframed by one sentence spoken in the right tone. Back in Department 47, the clerk stamped a filing and passed it up. The sound was blunt, mechanical, almost comforting. Judge Kessler asked, "Mr. Hall, did you execute a complete response to respondent's subpoena Deuces Tecum served April 9th?" Derek answered from counsel table. "Yes, Your Honour, to the extent materials existed." Melissa turned one page. The subpoena requested, among other categories, all in-home video or audio monitoring systems active in petitioner's residence during custodial periods from January through June. Karen interjected. Asked and answered. There were none relevant. Melissa's next sentence was quiet enough that the court had to lean into it. Then petitioner can explain why a registered device under his account appears in service provider logs produced under separate subpoena. Derek looked at her for the first time in an unpracticed way, as if he had misheard a language he thought he spoke fluently. By 12:10, the fluorescent hum over the gallery had become the day's constant soundtrack, and I found myself measuring my breathing against it so I would not drift into anger. Invalidating someone repeatedly is rarely loud at the beginning. It starts as translation. A neutral fact becomes a character flaw, then a flaw becomes identity. Derek had practiced that sequence on me for years in front of witnesses who preferred smooth evenings to difficult truth. At Ellie's kindergarten orientation, I had stood in a classroom that smelled of dry erase markers and new crayons while her teacher explained allergy protocols for snacks. I asked whether substitute teachers received the same sheet and where backup inhalers were stored during recess. Before the teacher answered, Derek laughed lightly and said, "Lauren runs incident command at home, too." The teacher smiled uncertainly. Another parent said, "At least one of you is relaxed." I watched my practical question mutate in real time into temperament. Later, in the parking lot, I told him he had undercut me in front of staff. He rested both hands on the steering wheel and said, "You make people tense, Lauren. I make them cooperative. That is why things work." I remember the steering wheel stitching under his thumbs and the way he never raised his voice when he wanted to win. Melissa asked permission to approach with a binder marked for identification, and Judge Kessler granted it. Karen objected to the entire line as premature absent authentication. "Precisely," Melissa replied. "I am requesting authentication now." The judge looked toward me briefly, then back to counsel. "Ms. Tran, if this is going where I think it is, I need a concrete chain, not implication." Melissa nodded. "Understood. We have certification from records custodian, service provider production under seal, and a county cyber evidence intake log tied to subpoena return." Derek leaned toward his attorney and whispered, but the microphone on counsel table caught two words anyway. "Not possible." Karen's jaw tightened. She rose and asked for a short sidebar. Denied. "No sidebars for scheduling disputes dressed as emergency," Judge Kessler said. "Put your positions on the record." Another memory arrived, sharper because it had happened in a room almost identical to this one, just smaller and meaner. It was our first private mediation session after separation. Beige walls, a conference speakerphone in the center, stale coffee in paper cups. The mediator asked each of us for non-negotiables. I said, predictable routine for Ellie, transparent medical communication, no disparagement in front of her. Derek folded his hands and said, "I need flexibility because Lauren can be emotionally extreme when she feels judged." The mediator, who had known us for 6 minutes, turned to me and asked, "Would you be willing to acknowledge that intensity can be hard for co-parents?" I said I was willing to acknowledge conflict, not false diagnosis. Derek exhaled with patient disappointment and said, "This is what I mean." He didn't have to prove instability. He only had to make refusal sound like symptom. When the session ended, he held the door for the mediator and told her, "Thank you for your calm." Then he told me in the hallway, almost kindly, "You should cry sometimes. People trust tears." That was the moment I realized he did not fear truth. He feared documentation. Judge Kessler called us back to present sequence with a single sentence. "We are not retrying marital tone." Her gaze settled on Derek. "We are determining whether this court was misled." She asked Melissa to make a formal offer of proof. Melissa did it in 4 parts, each one clipped and technical. Subpoena service date, non-production response, independent provider records, county intake of digital media obtained pursuant to supplemental order. Karen objected to foundation, relevance, prejudice, timing, and trial by ambush. Melissa answered each objection in order and without ornament. No ambush where there has been written demand, court order, and signed return. The court reporter's fingers moved faster than any of us spoke. Judge Kessler recessed us for lunch at 12:28 with instructions that nobody discussed testimony in hallway earshot. I stayed in my seat while the gallery thinned. The bench lights dimmed to half power, flattening the brass seal into matte gold. Melissa set her hand on the back of my chair and said, "Eat something if you can." I told her I couldn't. She slid a granola bar across the table anyway. "Then keep it in your bag. We may run long this afternoon." Derek walked past us without looking directly at me and said to Karen, loud enough for the first row to hear, "This is desperation." She had months to produce her theatrics. He left before either of us answered. No one corrected him. No one needed to. The room had already learned his cadence. In the attorney room downstairs, the coffee tasted burnt, and the fluorescent fixtures buzzed over chipped laminate counters. Melissa reviewed anticipated arguments while I wrote down every direct quote I could remember from the morning, adding timestamps from the wall clock when I had them. That habit began in residency with medication handoffs and followed me into marriage because memory is vulnerable where records are not. 3 days after our separation filing, Derek had called at 11:43 p.m. and said, "I will make this simple if you stop trying to sound like an expert in every room." I had logged the call and preserved the voicemail. 2 weeks later, he denied saying it. I played the file in mediation. He smiled and said, "You hear control, I hear concern." That had been our entire marriage in one exchange. Same data, opposite narrative, different social reward. When court resumed at 1:37, the gallery refilled with new faces and old curiosity. Afternoon hearings in family court attract a particular audience, people waiting on their own cases who absorb fragments of yours like cautionary folklore. Judge Kessler took the bench and said, "We are on the record in Hall versus Lewis, pending compliance and authentication." Her tone had shifted by half a degree. Less patient, more procedural. Melissa stood. "Respondent calls subpoena custodian Beatrice Shaw for limited testimony." An older woman in a county badge walked to the stand with a canvas evidence bag and a hard plastic case marked with tamper tape. Her grey hair was pinned in a precise coil, her glasses on a silver chain, posture exact. She looked like every nurse supervisor and archive manager I had ever trusted, unadorned, unflinching, answerable to process rather than personality. Ms. Shaw was sworn. Melissa asked only foundational questions. Name, title, duties, familiarity with digital intake procedure. Ms. Shaw answered in measured phrases. "I am Senior Records Custodian for Civil Subpoena Compliance, County Council Support Unit. I receive physical and digital materials, assign intake numbers, verify seals, log handlers, and transfer to designated forensic analysts." Melissa presented a subpoena return packet. "Do you recognize this?" "Yes. It is my signature on the intake certification and chain of custody log." Karen objected to hearsay and lack of technical expertise. Judge Kessler overruled as to custody foundation, reserved as to technical conclusions. Melissa then asked Ms. Shaw to identify the contents of the sealed case. Ms. Shaw read from her log. "One encrypted USB storage device, one micro SD adapter, one printed export manifest from residential monitoring application account ending in 4821, and one notarized affidavit from service provider compliance officer." Derek shifted hard enough that his chair wheels squeaked. Karen stood. "Your Honor, we renew objection. There is no established nexus to petitioner's household." Melissa handed up a second document. Nexus is in petitioner's own discovery response, page 7, where he lists account ending 4821 as his active home security subscription. Karen asked for time to review. Granted 5 minutes. The judge looked at Derek. "You swore there were no relevant recordings. Do you maintain that testimony?" Derek's throat moved once. "I maintain there were no recordings relevant to parenting conduct." It was a narrower sentence than the one he had given in the morning. Everyone heard the narrowing. Ms. Shaw remained on the stand while counsel reviewed documents. Melissa requested marking of the package as Respondent's Exhibit 14 for identification. The clerk placed a white sticker on the plastic case and read into the microphone, Respondents 14, Digital Media, sealed. That label looked almost absurd against the plain black case, ordinary enough to hold tax files or vacation photos. Instead, it held the object that had resisted every polite request for months. Symbolic evidence rarely announces itself. It arrives looking administrative. Judge Kessler asked for the remainder of the chain. Melissa called Captain Elena Ruiz from the county Cyber Evidence Unit for voir dire on authentication scheduling, and Ruiz stepped forward in uniform with a service binder tucked under one arm. She confirmed receipt from Ms. Shaw, verified hash generation protocol, and stated she could testify to continuity and integrity if the court set a focused evidentiary block. Karen objected to same-day expansion, citing fairness. Melissa answered that fairness had already been delayed by non-production. The judge considered both and ruled from the bench. Exhibit 14 is conditionally admitted for authentication hearing. Full playback determination deferred until foundation is completed. We proceed now with chain and scope. Derek stared at the black case as if it were a clerical error that would correct itself if ignored. I didn't look at him for long. I looked at the evidence sticker, the intact tamper seal, and Ms. Shaw's calm hands folded above the logbook. For the first time that day, the room's centre of gravity shifted away from performance and toward proof, and it shifted without raised voices, without speeches, without permission from the man who had spent years naming me first. Karen recovered first. She stood, buttoned her jacket, and asked for exclusion under prejudice, privacy, and fundamental fairness concerns tied to late-stage digital theatrics. She said theatrics while looking at me, not at the bench, as if she could push me back into the role she had assigned that morning, competent enough to be threatening, emotional enough to be discounted. Judge Kessler did not react. State legal basis, not adjectives. Karen did. Fast and polished, citing timing, scope, and parental privacy in a child's room. Melissa answered with dates, docket entries, service receipts, and one line that cut through all of it. A parent who seeks custody on credibility grounds does not get to curate reality after oath. Derek's pen stopped moving. Karen then requested a brief evidentiary colloquy among professionals, and she used that last phrase with deliberate emphasis. A small procedural knife turned toward me. Ms. Lewis is not technical counsel, she added. This should occur at sidebar. It was not unusual language, but the intention was plain. Remove me from hearing distance while they argued over the one item that could unwind months of accusation. Judge Kessler permitted a limited sidebar. I stayed in my chair while 4 people stepped forward and lowered their voices under the bench microphone's dead zone. From where I sat, I could see only shoulders, legal pads, and the county seal above them, bright and indifferent. Derek angled his body toward the gallery and folded his hands as though waiting patiently for reason to prevail. 2 people in the back row leaned toward each other and whispered. I caught one phrase. She brought spyware into custody court. The word spyware moved through me like cold water. I had expected direct attacks from Derek. I had not expected how quickly institutional shorthand would assist him. Obsessive, technical, tactical, vindictive. In family court, women with records become women with schemes in under 10 seconds if someone in a suit offers the translation with confidence. I kept my face neutral and wrote down what I heard, including the whisper, including the exact time from the digital clock above the jury box that this courtroom did not use. Derek looked over his shoulder and saw me writing. His expression changed by half a degree, irritation replacing composure. He preferred me absorbing impact, not documenting it. The sidebar ended. Judge Kessler returned to full voice. Request for exclusion denied at this stage. Respondent remains seated at counsel table. We proceed on authentication and relevance in open court. Karen's jaw tightened. Derek asked to be heard and received a curt nod. Your Honour, my daughter's private space is being weaponized. This is harassment disguised as evidence. He put enough strain into daughter to draw sympathy, then he turned slightly toward the gallery again, making sure his profile read paternal, wounded, civilized. I watched his right hand. It shook once, then steadied when he clasped it over his left. Fear was finally entering his body, but he still believed theatre could outrun data. Melissa asked that we move forward with chain of custody testimony before argument expanded. Karen objected to pace. I need technical consultation before cross. Judge Kessler gave her 10 minutes and did something she had not done all day. She ordered both parties to remain in the courtroom during the break. No hallway commentary, no witness contact, no exceptions. The bailiff closed the rear doors. People settled back into benches with the resigned silence of passengers told there would be turbulence. By 2:03 in the afternoon, the fluorescent light had gone from harsh to fatiguing, the kind that makes everyone look slightly ill and every file look old. Karen spread printed pages across counsel table and whispered to Derek with a finger pressed against one paragraph. He kept glancing at Exhibit 14 as if he could reverse it by staring hard enough. On my side, Melissa leaned close and spoke without moving her lips much. They'll press privacy and partial context. Stay off your face. No reactions if they insinuate motive. I nodded. They're already doing that. I know, she said. Let them spend their credibility on it. Derek asked for water. The bailiff brought a paper cup and placed it on the table between him and Karen. He drank, then said in a carrying whisper, "This is what she does. She records, archives, escalates." Karen murmured something I could not hear, and he answered louder, "Tell the court she begged nannies to monitor me." That was false. We had never employed a nanny after separation, only short-term childcare coverage through an agency when his travel overlapped my trauma nights, and he had selected the townhouse package himself because it included remote nursery monitoring. I felt my pulse rise, then settle. He was speaking for ambient effect again, trying to seed doubt before testimony began. When the judge took the bench again, Karen opened with a new slight dressed as concern. "Your Honour, even if this media exists, respondents' pattern of compulsive documentation raises reliability questions about how and why material was gathered. Compulsive documentation, a cleaner synonym for unstable." Melissa stood immediately. The source's petitioner's account, petitioner's hardware, petitioner's network subscription, obtained by subpoena from third parties. Respondent did not gather this. Karen lifted a shoulder. "That is what she says." I stood before Melissa could stop me because this one required my voice and because I understood exactly how much to use. "Your Honour, may I clarify one factual point?" Judge Kessler considered, then nodded. "One point." I kept my eyes on the bench. "I did not touch, access, or request direct transfer from petitioner's home devices. All retrieval was through court-authorised subpoena channels." "Noted," the judge said. I sat. Derek smiled without warmth and wrote something on his yellow pad in block letters, pressing hard enough to tear the page. Karen called for voir dire of Captain Ruiz outside my presence to avoid narrative contamination. Judge Kessler denied that too. "This is not a criminal suppression hearing. We are in open family court on sworn allegations." Karen pressed once more and received a stare that ended the attempt. The exclusion strategy failed in 3 separate forms, and each failure made Derek less careful. "She's manipulating process," he said under his breath, audible to the first 2 rows. Judge Kessler looked down. "Mr. Hall, one more outburst and I will strike your commentary in full." Captain Elena Ruiz returned to the stand, uniform precise, service binder aligned squarely with the witness rail. She did not perform authority, she occupied it. Melissa resumed foundation with technical questions that sounded dry until you understood what each answer did. Intake number, transfer date, seal condition, hash generation environment, analyst assignment, verification protocol. Ruiz answered in complete sentences with no extra verbs. The package arrived sealed. Seal was intact. I scanned and logged intake at 13:54 on June 2nd. I generated SHA 256 values for each file at first access. I conducted comparison hash after export. Values matched exactly. The court reporter did not pause once. Karen began cross with practiced skepticism. "Captain Ruiz, are you a parenting expert?" "No." "A child psychologist?" "No." "Then your testimony is limited to technical handling, correct?" "Correct." Karen nodded as if scoring a point. And you cannot tell this court what context is missing from any clip. Ruiz met her gaze. I can tell the court whether clips were edited, reordered, or fabricated. They were not. Karen tried a different angle. Could a person with medical training and high organizational skill manipulate metadata? The question was aimed at me without naming me. Ruiz did not turn toward counsel table. Any person with sufficient access and tools can attempt manipulation. In this matter, logs show no such access by respondent. The originating account credentials and device tokens map to petitioner's subscriber profile. Silence took the room for 2 full beats. Derek shifted in his chair. Karen asked, "Map how?" Ruiz opened her binder and read from a certified extract. Account ending 4821, user alias dhall-admin, registered email d.hall, redacted for record, paired device list includes iPhone ending 1187. County subpoena to carrier confirms location pings from that phone overlapping timestamp windows on 27 of 31 selected recordings. She looked up. That is correlation, not speculation. Derek's hand went to his tie knot and stayed there. Judge Kessler asked her own question. Captain, were there gaps? There were 2 offline windows attributable to router outage, reflected in system diagnostics. Outside those windows, continuity is intact. Any sign of post-capture deletion attempts? Ruiz turned 1 page. Yes, Your Honor. 3 attempted remote deletions occurred after service of preservation notice. Attempts failed due to cloud lock on legal hold. Karen objected to scope. Overruled. Derek made a sound I had never heard from him in public. Not loud, just sharp and involuntary, the sound of someone discovering that private control has boundaries. By 2:41, the gallery had stopped whispering. Even the people waiting for unrelated hearings were following each line now because the room recognized the shift, even if it did not yet know the outcome. Karen tried to impeach Ruiz on familiarity with my name. You recognized respondent, did you not? Ruiz answered before the insinuation could mature. I recognize the name from county pediatric evidence preservation trainings provided to multidisciplinary staff. I disclosed that recognition to my supervisor and requested secondary analyst confirmation to avoid any appearance of bias. Karen stepped into it anyway. So, you had prior contact. Ruiz shook her head once. No personal contact. Institutional training attendance in a lecture hall with over 100 participants. My analysis was independently verified by analyst Chen. His certification is in the packet. She handed the page to the bailiff, who passed it up to the bench. That was the recognition moment, and it did not arrive as sentiment. It arrived as procedural credibility from someone whose job was to distrust everyone equally. In a morning spent portraying me as erratic and performative, the county's own cyber evidence captain had just described me as the opposite. A professional voice associated with preservation standards, disclosed for transparency, then insulated with second review protocol. No praise, no speech, just status language that courts understand. Judge Kessler leaned back, eyes on Karen. Do you have technical rebuttal witness present? Karen paused. Not at this time. Do you dispute chain? We dispute interpretation. Noted, chain is established for playback purposes. She turned to the clerk. Set monitor and audio. We will proceed with limited in-court review of Exhibit 14, beginning with timestamps identified in respondent's proffer and any counter-designations from petitioner. Derek stood halfway. Your Honor, I request recess. Denied. Sit down, Mr. Hall. He sat. His pen hovered over the page, then lowered without writing. Melissa did not look at me. She knew better than to break discipline at the edge of a reversal. I kept my hands flat on the table and watched the clerk wheel in the evidence monitor. Matte black screen reflecting the brass seal, the bench lights, and all the faces that had spent the day deciding who I was. When the HDMI cable clicked into place, no one asked whether I was unstable. They asked whether the volume was high enough for the record. The clerk tapped the keyboard twice, and a test tone pulsed through the ceiling speakers, thin and clinical, followed by her neutral confirmation. Audio is live. Recording monitor active. She turned the screen so the bench had full view, then angled a secondary display toward counsel tables, leaving the gallery to watch our faces instead of the image itself. That arrangement suited Derek's usual strategy. He had always counted on expression to outrun content. Judge Kessler adjusted her glasses and said, "Respondent may designate first clip. Keep this narrow and relevant." Melissa stood. Respondent designates file 14-03, timestamp June 11th, 1912 through 1931, with corresponding location records already marked. Karen objected to cumulative prejudice. Overruled. The judge nodded to the clerk. "Play." The video opened on a nursery corner I knew by memory but had not seen in months. White shelving, a crescent nightlight, the edge of a rocking chair Derek had insisted was for optics when guests visited after Ellie's birth. The camera angle was high and fixed. No drama, no music, no editorial hand. Just a room and a clock imprint in the corner, counting seconds in pale digits. Ellie sat on the floor with stacking cups, speaking in the soft, repetitive cadence children use when they are narrating play to themselves. Derek crossed the frame in a pressed shirt, phone in one hand, legal pad in the other. He looked into the camera once, then set the pad on the dresser and rehearsed sentences under his breath while she called for him to watch her tower. He answered without turning. 1 minute. The minute extended. She asked again. He continued speaking to his reflection in the dresser mirror, trying out intonations, structured concern, emotional volatility, best interests. In court, those words had sounded paternal. On that screen, they sounded practiced. Karen rose halfway. "Your Honour, this is editorial interpretation by counsel." Judge Kessler did not look at her. "Sit down, Ms. Halbrook. The witness on screen is your client." Melissa did not comment. She let the clip run until Derek took a call, stepped into the hallway, and left the room for 11 minutes while Ellie remained in frame. No incident, no injury, only a child waiting and asking whether Daddy was coming back. The judge lifted a hand. Pause. She looked toward Derek. "You testified there were no relevant recordings. Do you dispute that this is your residence and your person on screen?" Derek's mouth opened, closed, then reset. "I dispute relevance." The judge's pen moved once across her notes. "Dispute noted." Melissa designated the second clip, shorter, same week, morning, timestamp. Derek sat in the rocking chair with Ellie on his knee and prompted her in a careful tone. "If anyone asks, what do you say?" Ellie answered with the uncertain obedience of a child repeating words she did not understand. "Mommy doesn't want me when she works." He corrected cadence, not content. "Slower." "Say it slower." He asked again. She repeated again. He smiled at the camera-facing mirror, then lifted her down and walked out with his phone already at his ear. Karen stood on objection before the clip ended. "Coaching for transition anxiety is not abuse, Your Honour." Judge Kessler's response was flat. "No one said abuse. Sit." By the time the third clip ended, the courtroom had settled into the kind of silence that is not politeness, but recalculation. In that file, Derek stood alone in the nursery doorway, practicing deposition answers while the nanny cam captured him from above. I encouraged attachment. She documented schedules like a supervisor. He stopped, frowned, and tried a softer version. I feared for emotional stability. He looked directly into the mirror and delivered the line he later gave under oath almost verbatim. I had spent years being told I was overreading him, that I confused anxiety with analysis, that my records were defenses against intimacy. Now his own recordings provided the missing denominator, intention. Judge Kessler asked Captain Ruiz to confirm continuity for each played segment. Ruiz did so with the same dry cadence she had used all afternoon. "No edits detected. Timecode consistency confirmed against source hash and export hash. Device origin logs align with petitioner account credentials." The judge turned to Derek again. "Mr. Hall, final opportunity before I make findings on credibility. Is there any basis, factual or technical, to claim fabrication?" Karen requested to answer on behalf of her client. Denied. Derek swallowed visibly. "No fabrication. Context is incomplete." Judge Kessler gave a small nod, as if filing the phrase in the correct box. "Context cuts both ways." Then the reversal arrived exactly the way institutional power arrives when it is done correctly: concise, public, and procedural. Judge Kessler set her pen down, looked at the clerk, and dictated into the record with measured pace. As to petitioner's allegations that respondent is emotionally unstable and unfit, the court finds those allegations unsupported on the present record and materially undermined by petitioner's own undisclosed recordings. Petitioner's testimony regarding non-existence of relevant in-home media was false or recklessly misleading. Accordingly, the court strikes petitioner's unfitness claims as pleaded, reserves sanctions pending full fee declaration, and modifies interim custodial authority effective immediately. Respondent shall have primary decision-making authority over medical, educational, and therapeutic matters pending final order. She shifted one page. Petitioner's parenting time is converted to supervised visitation on a temporary basis, scheduled to be set through family services within 5 court days. Petitioner is ordered into a parenting communication program and prohibited from coaching the minor regarding either parent. No one moved while she read. Even the bailiff held still near the doors. The county seal behind the bench caught the monitor glow, brass reflecting blue-white light in hard edges. I felt my pulse in my wrists, not from triumph, but from the abrupt release of pressure that had been locked in my chest for months. Melissa touched my forearm once, a precise acknowledgement rather than comfort, and whispered, "Stay steady. We still need written entry." I nodded, eyes forward. Judge Kessler continued. The court also sets an evidentiary sanctions hearing in 14 days on discovery abuse and bad faith litigation conduct. Respondent's counsel will submit proposed order by 4 p.m. tomorrow. Petitioner may object in writing only. She looked directly at Derek, not by hallway narrative, not by selective disclosure. In writing, he gave a stiff nod that did not reach his eyes. "Yes, Your Honour." She turned to me. "Ms. Lewis, you will continue documenting medical and school communications through the court-approved application. Keep entries factual and child-focused." "Yes, Your Honour," I said. My voice held. The clerk read back key terms: primary decision-making to respondent, supervised visitation to petitioner, sanctions hearing date confirmed. Each phrase landed with administrative clarity, the language Derek had always used as costume, now binding him instead. In one afternoon, he had tried to construct me as instability embodied, and in less than 10 recorded minutes, his own conduct had reset the legal hierarchy of the case. Not a speech, a transcript. Derek's destabilization began in details too small for drama and too plain to deny. The colour drained from his face in a slow wash that left his skin almost grey under fluorescent light. He reached for his water cup and missed the rim on the first attempt, fingertips tapping damp cardboard before he got his grip. Karen slid a legal pad toward him and whispered, "Do not speak." He spoke anyway, barely audible at first. "This is disproportionate." Judge Kessler did not answer. She was already signing minute orders. Karen attempted salvage through tone. "Your Honour, for preservation, petitioner objects to temporary supervision as overbroad, absent findings of direct risk." The judge looked up. "Findings are on the record. Deception under oath, coaching statements by the minor, and non-compliance with discovery. Your objection is preserved." Karen sat, lips pressed thin. Derek leaned toward her and whispered with strain I could hear 3 feet away, "You said they had nothing." She replied without turning her head, "They had nothing until you denied the camera." He stared at her as if translation itself had betrayed him. In the second row, 2 observers who had tracked his testimony all morning stopped writing. One closed a notebook and set it on her lap without taking her eyes off him. The man beside her shifted back, folded his arms, and avoided Derek's gaze when Derek looked over his shoulder for affirmation that no longer existed. Audience perception had been his durable instrument. Now the audience had no use for him. The room had watched him construct concern as a weapon, and then watched source data collapse it. There was nowhere to place charisma against a time-stamped mirror rehearsal. Judge Kessler asked whether either side had urgent housekeeping issues. Melissa requested immediate release of authenticated copies for family services intake and school notification protocol. Granted. Karen requested a stay of supervision pending review. Denied. "Not on this record." the judge said. Derek exhaled through his nose, sharp enough that the court reporter glanced up for half a second before returning to her machine. He uncapped his pen, tried to write, and produced only a jagged line across the yellow page. He turned the sheet, tried again, then set the pen down with visible effort, fingers trembling once before he tucked his hand under the table. 3 days earlier, I had walked into this room carrying binders and cauterized hope, prepared to defend routine against spectacle, one objection at a time. Now the same room watched the man who called me unstable struggle to form a sentence that would not damage him further. He asked, "May I address the court briefly?" Karen whispered, "No." Judge Kessler answered first, "You may address the court through counsel." Derek's throat worked. No words followed. The clerk approached counsel tables with printed minute slips for review before filing. Derek took his copy and stared at the lines as if they were in a foreign language. Primary decision-making authority, respondent, supervised visitation, petitioner, sanctions hearing, set. He blinked rapidly, then pressed thumb and forefinger against the bridge of his nose, an old gesture from contract negotiations when numbers moved against him. This time there was no renegotiation, only compliance deadlines. Karen gathered her exhibits with clipped efficiency and began separating what could be salvaged from what had become liability. Her composure held, but the velocity of her movements told the truth. She was no longer litigating offence, she was containing collapse. When the judge rose, everyone stood. Derek stood too quickly, steadied himself on counsel table, then released it as if contact itself were incriminating. The bailiff opened the side door for judicial exit. The bench went empty. Sound returned in fragments, zippers, paper shuffling, chair legs scraping wood. Derek remained upright for a moment with his minute slip in one hand, an uncapped pen in the other, then sat down again without apparent decision, staring at the black monitor, now dark and reflective. In that blank screen he could see his own outline, pale and indistinct, while behind him the gallery dispersed with the quiet indifference reserved for people whose authority has already expired. I stayed seated until the last bench in the gallery emptied, and the fluorescent hum returned to being just electricity instead of judgment. Melissa capped her pen, slid the proposed order checklist toward me and said, "We do this cleanly now. Certified copies, family services intake, school notice, then you go home." Her voice had the same tone she used in trial prep, precise enough to keep emotion from becoming fog. I nodded and gathered what had to be gathered, my legal pad with every quote logged, the granola bar I still had not touched, the minute slip, and the binder tabbed claim, foundation, contradiction that no longer looked like a defense plan and now looked like an archive. At counsel table across from us, Karen was already stacking boxes with the speed of containment. Derek still stared at the dark monitor. He finally stood when the clerk approached to collect unsigned exhibit lists. The tremor in his hand had not stopped. He looked at me once, then at Melissa, then back at me as if searching for a line he could still control. "You wanted this," he said, quiet enough that only our tables heard. Melissa answered before I did. What she wanted was compliance. I didn't add anything. The room had already heard enough from him. The clerk called me to the side desk. "Ms. Lewis, verify spellings for the interim order and school protocol addendum." I checked every line. Primary legal and physical custody to respondent. Supervised visitation through family services. Parenting communication through the court-approved app only. No coaching language, no disparagement. She stamped each page with a hard downward strike that echoed off wood and brass. "One's certified for you, one for family services, one for school, one for service. Exhibit 14 remains with the court." She pointed toward the evidence cart where the black case sat with the white sticker still intact. "Digital master is sealed in records vault. Forensic duplicate logged to appellate archive. Physical evidence accounted for, chain complete, no missing hands in the middle." Beatrice Shaw appeared at my elbow with her logbook open, glasses low on her nose. "I need your signature acknowledging receipt of certified derivative documents, not source media." I signed on the line she indicated. She signed beneath me and tore off my copy. "For what it is worth," she said, not warm and not cold, only factual, "your documentation habits made today legible." Then she closed the book and walked the sealed case through the staff door. She never looked back. She never needed to. By 5:10 that evening, I was in the Family Services intake office 2 floors down. where the walls were painted the bureaucratic shade of calming blue that never calmed anyone. Intake coordinator Janelle Price read the order twice, then opened the scheduling system. First supervised session is available Saturday at 10 or Monday at 4:30. I chose Monday so Ellie would have her usual weekend rhythm first. Janelle typed, printed terms, and read them aloud. Neutral monitor present, no case discussion with child, no recording devices. Arrival and departure staggered by 15 minutes. She looked up. If petitioner violates, we file an incident report to court the same day. She slid the form to me. Emergency contact and pediatric information. I handed over the medical sheet already prepared. Old habits, newly sanctioned. My phone vibrated while I signed. School nurse office. Call back to the message Melissa had sent from the clerk's computer 10 minutes earlier. I put the call on speaker with Janelle's permission. This is Nurse Bradley. We received a legal notification pending verification. Is this Ms. Lewis? Yes. Can you confirm whether there are any restrictions on pickup today? I read directly from the order. Only I am authorized for unsupervised pickup and medical decision communication until further court direction. She paused, then said, Understood. We will update release cards immediately. Her tone softened by half a degree. Your daughter had art today. She asked if you were coming. I'm on my way. We'll keep her in the front office. When I ended the call, Janelle handed me a sealed envelope. Service copy for petitioner intake packet. You don't deliver this. We do. External contact closed. Outcome documented. The side corridor outside family services smelled faintly of floor wax and rain from people coming in off the steps. Derek stood near the elevator bank with Karen, speaking in clipped fragments about objections and appellate options. When he saw the envelope in my hand, he took one step toward me. The bailiff from Department 47, the same one who had seated me behind counsel that morning, moved between us with professional neutrality. Sir, not here. Derek stopped. He looked at me with the same expression he used in mediation when he thought a better sentence was still available to him. None came. He turned away and kept talking to Karen about timelines, then broke off mid-thought when the elevator doors opened. Whatever finish he had planned for that sentence never arrived, and later he never supplied it. Outside, the late afternoon cold had sharpened into evening. The air on the courthouse steps tasted metallic, like the water from the hallway fountain during recess, only cleaner. I stood there long enough to feel my shoulders drop from defensive posture to ordinary posture, then walked to the parking lot and drove to Ellie's school. Nurse Bradley met me at the office door with a clipboard and a look I had seen on clinicians after difficult consults, careful, professional, slightly apologetic for a system she did not design. We updated authorized contacts and scanned your order, she said. Principal Ortega asked me to tell you all custody communications now route through district council. She hesitated. Mr. Hall previously requested verbal updates about emotional incidents. We declined after today's order. Thread noted, outcome clear. I thanked her, signed pickup, and crouched when Ellie ran into my arms so she could hit me at full speed without losing balance. In the car, she told me about a paper lighthouse she had made and asked whether Monday was library day. I answered yes and no and yes again to small questions and kept my voice even because children measure safety in tone long before they understand legal nouns. At a red light, she asked, Are you mad? I gripped the wheel lightly and said, I am not mad at you. I am proud of you. Grown-ups are fixing schedules so things feel steady. She accepted that and returned to describing glitter glue with complete seriousness. That was grace in its purest form. She did not need the transcript, only the routine. 14 days later, Department 47 smelled the same. Paper dust, old coffee, disinfectant. And for once, the sameness did not feel like a threat. The sanctions hearing lasted 43 minutes. Karen stipulated to discovery failure on behalf of her client and withdrew all remaining unfitness language with prejudice. Judge Kessler entered written findings: material misrepresentation under oath, discovery abuse, bad faith litigation conduct. Monetary sanctions were ordered in a fixed amount payable to my council trust account within 30 days, plus forensic costs to county services. She required Derek to file within 7 days corrective notices to school administration and pediatric providers stating that no court finding of maternal instability existed. He said, Yes, Your Honour, each time she assigned a duty, and each yes sounded like a document being filed shut. Marlene Pritchard was there in the back row with a folded statement in her lap. During the break, she approached Melissa, not me, and asked where to submit a supplemental declaration. She said she had signed Derek's draft without reviewing source context and wanted that on record. Melissa gave her the filing window and walked away. Marlene looked at me as if she expected either absolution or argument. I gave her neither. She filed it later that afternoon. I saw the docket entry myself. The loaded look from the second-row observers on hearing day never became conversation. They never approached, never asked, and I noted that silence for what it was, spectatorship, not witness. At 4:02 p.m. the same day, the clerk handed me the conformed final custody order. Every item that had entered this case through performance now exited through procedure. Exhibit 14 remained sealed in court custody with appellate duplicate preserved. Family Services filed 2 supervised visit compliance reports, both uneventful and both child-focused. School and paediatric offices acknowledged receipt of corrective notice by secure email. District Council copied Melissa and filed proof. The court-approved parenting app replaced calls, late-night monologues and hallway theatre with time-stamped messages that could not be rewritten after the fact. Even the 11:43 p.m. voicemail from 3 days after separation, the one he denied and then reframed, sat in my archive labelled and backed up. Not because I needed to wield it, but because I no longer intended to surrender memory to charisma. That evening, I put the custody order in the fireproof box beside Ellie's birth certificate and vaccination record, then closed the lid and turned the key. Ellie was in the next room reading aloud to her stuffed bear in a solemn voice she used for important stories. I stood at the kitchen counter where so many schedules had been mocked as evidence of coldness and laid out Monday's lunch, inhaler and library card in a straight line. The house was quiet, not empty, structured, not rigid, safe, not staged. My name is Lauren Lewis. I was called unstable in open court by a man who depended on audience perception, and I answered with records, sequence and restraint until truth could stand on its own feet. Silence was never peace. It was not surrender either. It was discipline, and it carried me to my daughter's safety, my legal name restored, and a life no longer waiting for permission to be believed.